Hi, I'm Lori Rozakis. Welcome to Video Aided Instructions Upgrade Your Writing series. This is the third program in the series, Overcoming Writer's Block. Well, what is writer's block? It's the inability to get your words down on paper. It usually occurs between planning and drafting, but it can occur at any time in the writing process. It can last only a few moments, or it can last far, far longer. It can cause great anxiety and problems in school, especially when it comes to writing on standardized or high-stakes tests. Professionals, as well as student writers, can suffer from writer's block. You've probably heard jokes about writer's block. People make funny lines about it and things, but there's really nothing funny at all about having an inability to write, especially when you're under pressure. So what are the main reasons for writer's block? Some people just don't know what they're writing about. They have a lack of subject knowledge. Other people have a fear of failure. Sometimes you experience writer's block because you're afraid of being rejected, or you're afraid that you have nothing to say. Perhaps you have the inverse. You're afraid of becoming a success, or you might be afraid of offending your audience. Some people experience only one of these blocks, and they experience it repeatedly, while other people are blocked for different reasons, depending on the writing situation. But don't worry about it. There are ways that I will teach you for you to overcome your writer's block, no matter what its cause. Let's start with the first reason, lack of subject knowledge. The problem is you've been given a writing assignment and you don't have any ideas, or you don't know enough about the subject that you've been assigned. How can you overcome writer's block in this instance? Well, first of all, start by becoming an active learner. Now, you can't obviously do that when you're in the middle of the writing situation, but you can do that as a general habit as you go through life. Ask questions, seek out knowledge. If you see a movie, go home and look up the movie, find out what the reviews were, find out what other people said, find out the background information. If you read a news story, do some research, find out other things about the background of the story. In other words, become engaged in the learning process. In addition, you can become a reader. Now, you don't have to read War and Peace every single day, sit there and slog through old novels. You can read a newspaper, you can read a magazine, you can read a novel, you can read nonfiction. But try to read every single day, at least for half an hour. Because by making reading a habit, you'll find out that you absorb a great deal of knowledge. This knowledge, of course, comes in very handy when you have to write, especially under pressure. Be a culture vulture, as I like to call it. In other words, go to movies, listen to the radio, watch television, find out what's going on around you, become aware of current events. You can surf the web, learn a lot of interesting stuff. Some of it's true, some of it's not, but at least you're keeping your mind active. You can research. Use reputable sources. You've probably heard about Wikipedia, which is an encyclopedia written by average people. After you've checked something on the web, be sure to check it in a reliable source, which is normally a print source. You can also socialize, spend time with other people, listen to what they have to say, engage them in conversation. You can keep a journal or a clip file. Professional writers tend to keep journals. They write down their thoughts, but they also clip out interesting articles from newspapers and magazines. And last, you can keep an online journal or a blog in which you interact with other people. So, to review, you can become an active learner, you can read daily, you can get involved with culture, surf the web, research, socialize, keep a journal, a print clipping, and keep a blog. All of these techniques will help you learn interesting things that you can then bring into your writing. And the more stuff you know coming in, the less likely you are to be blocked, because you'll have a lot of background information to start with. Number 2, perhaps you're blocked because you're afraid of failing. The problem is you're afraid that your essay won't be any good. You're afraid that you're going to get a poor grade, or that you'll look foolish in front of other people. And so you just don't write because you don't want these things to happen to you. How can you solve this block? Don't concentrate on what you're doing wrong. Instead, concentrate on what you're doing right. Don't beat yourself up. Be good to yourself as you're getting your ideas down on paper. Consider your paper as a first draft, not as a final copy. Write it quickly and then go back and revise it, because this will relieve a lot of your anxiety and make you less tense. Remember that everybody has the same fears. Nobody wants to look foolish. And that even though you think you may be the only one who is suffering this particular torment, the odds are most everybody else in the class is afraid of looking foolish as well. So don't beat yourself up about it, because it's a natural kind of fear. Concentrate on the good stuff that you're writing, and you'll find that a lot of your fear of failure will dissolve. Number 3, perhaps you're blocked because you have a fear of rejection. Writing, by its very nature, is an act of self-revelation. Even if you're writing about a nonfiction or a fiction or anything whatsoever, you're afraid that you're going to reveal something about yourself and how you feel about things. And if your writing isn't any good, or your teacher gives you a low grade, then you're going to feel rejected as well. The solution is, don't reveal your innermost thoughts. Adopt a persona or an identity that you use to write. So, for example, you may choose to imagine yourself as somebody different. You might imagine yourself as older. You might imagine yourself from a different culture. And when you adopt that persona, it will be easier for you to write, because you won't feel that you yourself are being rejected. In addition, try to choose a non-fiction rather than a fiction option if you have that choice. So if you're writing about penguins, for example, rather than telling your life story, the odds are you will reveal far less of yourself. Next, perhaps you're afraid that you have nothing to say. You're afraid that your writing is trite or your writing is boring. It won't be original. The teacher will have read it 100 times. And you're thinking, why should I even bother? Because if I'm going to say something not worth saying, I'm going to get a low grade. The solution is prepare thoroughly. Know your stuff, because if you've got a lot of detail, even if the teacher has read it before, it will be very interesting, because you will have that specific detail that the other writers did not. And you would prepare, of course, by doing your reading and doing your research. You can choose an unusual topic if you do have the option of choosing your own topic. For example, I once wrote a paper about eating insects. I'm not fond of insects in general, and I'm certainly not fond of eating them. But I did some research, and I found that in many other cultures, insects are eaten routinely. People eat crickets, people eat grasshoppers, people eat ants, people eat maggots. They fry them, they saute them, and they're considered quite a tasty treat. And so I wrote a paper on how to make chocolate chip grasshopper cookies, how to make fried grasshoppers, how to make fried crickets, and it was a very interesting paper to write and an interesting paper to read. And it relieved my writer's block because I had something a little bit different to say. Next, if you've got a common topic, take an uncommon approach. You might want to be a little bit contrarian. In other words, if everybody is saying it this way, you might want to say it the other way. So you're going to take something as commonplace as the cause of a war, for example, and argue, yes, that's valid, but let's look at it from an entirely different viewpoint. And that makes your topic and your paper far more interesting, and it gives you something good to say. I once had a student who argued that the driving age should not be lowered, but should be raised to 30, and that nobody under the age of 30 should be allowed to drive a car. I thought, what an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of 30. I thought of maybe 21 or 22, but never 30. And the writer made some very interesting points by citing accident statistics. And so I found the paper very, very interesting. Next, you might be afraid of being a big success because you're afraid that if you get A's on your papers, perhaps you'll be asked to do more and more writing, and you might not be up to that challenge. Or maybe if you get a lot of A's, your friends won't think you're very cool. And you don't want to stand out for being a writer. Perhaps you want to stand out for some other reason, because in some places it's not considered that cool to be that good academically. You know, of course, that it's very cool to be good academically. Your solution is, of course, if you have talent, be true to your talent. If you don't think you have talent, assume that you do anyway and work your hardest. Be true to yourself. If your friends are your friends, they will stick with you. And if they put you down for writing well, they're not really your friends anyway. Perhaps you're afraid of offending your audience. You're afraid that your writing will hurt other people. And in some cases, your writing will hurt other people and it will offend other people. The solution is don't. Don't push the limits. Don't offend anybody. Choose a different topic. Or take a slant on the topic that you will not offend anybody, because you don't want to hurt feelings. There's no reason to do that, especially not in writing. Now, how do you break through writer's block other than the ways I've just discussed? Well, first of all, you should know that it tends not to be a chronic condition. It tends usually to be temporary. Most of the time, writers just need a little bit of a nudge to break through. So in this program, I'm going to teach you 16 more ways to cure writer's block. I'd like you to try them all. See which ones work best for you. Remember that some will work best in one situation, others will work best in others. You might find one technique works very well if you're taking a high-stakes standardized test, like an SAT or an ACT, whereas another technique might work a lot better for classroom writing. Be flexible. Try different techniques with different writing tasks. And again, you'll find out which ones work best for you. Here's our first technique. Use pre-writing techniques. You learn these in Program 1. To review briefly, a blank sheet of paper is very intimidating to all writers. So you want to get something useful written on it as fast as you can. So use those pre-writing techniques that you learned in the first program. Listing, webbing, charting, free writing, asking questions. So now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and pre-write about atoms by making a short list. Remember what you learned about listing. It's very important that you write down those numbers, because the act of writing down those numbers gets your brain in gear. And then the page is no longer blank because you've already started writing. So write down the numbers, perhaps number 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, and do some brainstorming about atoms. You may need to do a little bit of research, maybe use a science textbook, an online resource, or maybe a magazine or newspapers. When you're done, please come back. Here's my answer. I wrote for an overview, well, there's about 100 different kinds of atoms. Now, I'm not 100% sure, I'm not even 99% sure, that that's correct.